Biotech absolutely fits into our ambitions for a decarbonised economy. We're like every other country on the planet trying to work out how do you quickly and efficiently reduce emissions without completely breaking your economy at the same time.
Hey, Erum, what's going on?
Hey, Karl. I've been very busy. We've been very busy just hopping around Brooklyn. There's been a lot of small, intimate biotech events. We've been hanging out with our friends. It's been great. How did you like those events that we went to?
So last week, a new group, BSL1, had an event in Dumbo, Brooklyn, which is where our office is located. And I thought that was a great event. Ran into a lot of people that we know. Alex Rose was there. The guys who used to be part of Melon Frost were there. The guys from Caledon, who is a new startup that's developing high throughput benchtop fermentation equipment. And we know some of them. And they're the ones that just moved into Dumbo. So they're going to be neighbors of ours. So I'm very excited for that. What do you think of that event?
It was great. Yeah, I loved the fact that Caledon rolled deep. One of the former founders of Melon Frost now works at Caledon, which is really cool that the Brooklyn biotech community is working together. If one company is no longer there, other company picks those people up. I love to see that. And Caledon Bio is so interesting. I didn't realize that the CEO was from Opentrons, which is so cool because I talked to him and I think we should definitely get him on the podcast, but just the learning of having affordable automation in the lab by working at Opentrons and now bringing that same mentality to another product, like affordable automated benchtop fermentation. How do you price that? How do you get that into the hands of scientists across universities, startups, corporations? They already know that. They've seen it happen. And I asked him, do you feel a bit more relaxed because you've had this experience? And he was like, yeah, absolutely. So I'm very excited for them. And it was great to see that we do have this community of people supporting not just Caledon, which is they're great, but they support each other. It was great to catch up, learn about who's interested in what they're seeing in the industry, new ideas for fermentation or using biology, and just a great summer day. I loved it. I love that. I think we should do more of it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I love about summer in New York City is everything slows down because of the heat. And being able to meet people is way more casual. And you can take a lot more time to have long conversations than, say, other times of the year. We're a little bit more pressed for time. I do want to give a shout out to Kate McDonough, who's going to be leaving us. She had been working at Nancy Kelly Associates, and now she's going to be doing a master's in real estate. And she's going to be focusing on urban lab space, which I think is going to be something that's really needed. We had a conversation about how there's all this empty office space. It's a challenge to convert office space to living space. It's also a challenge to turn it into lab space, but people are doing it. And so I think having Kate understand that market was going to be really interesting. I'm looking forward to following her trajectory. The other thing was we got invited by Julie Wolf of 2048 to an event on Friday that you were at, and you brought your whole family. And so that was fun.
Well, I brought my family because Abria always brings her family. And I was like, well, if you're going to bring your daughter and husband, I'm going to bring my son and my husband.
Yeah, so that was great. Julie organized that to get us together with Miriam El Garbi, who is a biosecurity person from the UK. But Marion was delayed because of the CrowdStrike update, if we want to call it, that basically shut down the world for 24 hours. So that was a lot of fun. What do you think of the get together? That was Friday afternoon, Friday evening.
Yeah, definitely a whirlwind. It was great. When I have my son around, it's a little bit distracting. But again, good to catch up with people that we know very intimately. Bringing the families together is great too, because it just shows that we are very passionate about biology and biotech. Our family sees that. We want our biotech friends to know us more intimately. We had a previous episode about networking and building relationships. I mean, there's no better way of developing relationships than if you bring your friends and family together. And I think it's great. And then my son is a huge fan of Uncle Karl. He's a huge fan. And I'm like, I love Karl, of course. We have these conversations, but for a 3-year-old, it was so crazy because that event that Julie Wolf hosted, that was on a Friday evening. And then Saturday, my whole family went to a pool party. We did all these events. And then Sunday went to another event, playground, all sorts of fun. And on Sunday, I asked my son, so what was your favorite part of this weekend? And he said, hanging out with Uncle Karl. And I was like, what? I was like, I pretended to be a horse and you're riding on my back. I fed you. I bathed you. I took you to all these things. Uncle Karl just talks to you and plays with you for like 15 minutes.
I am the father of 3 sons, Erum, so I must have a special connection with them. And I was also trying to make the connection with Mira, Sabria's daughter, who's 2. So we were having a lot of fun. I was having a lot of fun with the little kids, reliving some past days. So we do have a special announcement. As you listen to this, this will drop on Friday. Next Wednesday, if you're in New York City, we're going to be doing a live recording. That's going to be our first live recording in an event that is sponsored by Biotech XYZ, which is a grad student organization. They, Biolabs New York, and Millipore Sigma have invited us to do the live podcast recording, and we're doing it with Ginger Dozier, who used to be at Biomason and who's been on this pod and who's a good friend of ours. I'm super excited about it. What about you, Erum?
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited. I'm nervous. This is the first time we're doing a live recording. I'm excited that it's going to be at IndieBio, so a great hub for the growing biotech startups and the industry here in New York City. I am excited to talk to Ginger. I mean, again, we've been talking to her off the record. She's up to some very exciting things. And I think what's going to be really interesting and special about this event is that the audience, they're very focused on biopharma. These graduate students have been trained in looking at the pharmaceutical industry, looking at the healthcare industry, pretty much what people think biotech is. So they really wanted to do this because they wanted to expose their community to what's going on in the bioindustrial space. And it's going to be great to introduce these concepts to this community of young minds. They're graduating with master's degrees in business, in healthcare, and sciences. And now they're going to know what other opportunities exist for them beyond just biopharma.
Yeah, I will also admit that I'm a little nervous because it is the first time that we've done it in front of people this way. But I think with you and Ginger on stage, I'll be fine.
Yeah, it'll be fun for sure.
I think before we get into the podcast, there was just some news that I wanted to mention. I shared this with you that Nike slashed its sustainability staff. And this is kind of interesting and important because we talk a lot about how biotech impacts sustainability. We often use that quote that the Venn diagram between climate and biotech is a circle. And back in 2016, Nike said they were going to double their business and half their impact on the warming planet. But then this year, they cut their costs about $2 billion, laid off half the workforce that's associated with sustainability. And they've been doing really well. But Nike has been losing market shares. Multinational companies are under increasing mandates to disclose climate risks, trace the origins of where their raw materials are coming from, and show and deliver on the carbon reductions they've promised. So I thought that this was a bit of a disappointment. What do you think, Erum?
Yeah, it's always hard to understand why big companies like a Nike makes these decisions. They did cut their sustainability team in half, but did they cut their commitments? It does sound like they're still committed to it, but I wonder if they're re-strategizing their approach to sustainability, which I hope that's the case. I don't know. If they're equating losing market share because they have a sustainability team, that's a shame. It always seems like when companies facing challenges, they just cut the newer initiatives that are meant to help them grow their company. But since they're new and maybe they don't have the time to mature their strategies or actually execute upon them and understand the metrics from executing on their strategy, that what the outcomes are, like maybe they're not as big as they would be if they were working on it for 10 years. So I'm thinking of sustainability, but also the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. They always get cut first. It's interesting to me why those are the first to go. But at the same time, I really hope isn't just saying like, oh, yeah, we're not going to do anything on the sustainability side. We are gung-ho. We just overhired and we just need a right size. I hope that's the case. And then they would need to put more of an effort to actually demonstrate that they are committed to sustainability across the board. For us, we're always thinking of biomaterials and how are they working with partners to grow materials? What are the regenerative practices? So hopefully this isn't a signal that they're just flipping and they're just going to be like, whatever, we don't care. We're just going to just shoehorn, for lack of a better term, our way back into the market. I've seen also on the flip side, like a lot of innovation happening from other shoe brands. Like On had created this spray-on shoe type of product. I have to put that in the link, but I was like, On's getting a lot of market share. They really went in on running wholeheartedly, where Nike isn't running, but they're also across a variety of sports. What about you? Do you think this is a signal that they're not going to be going into sustainability?
So they've made a lot of progress. And I think that it's notable. You don't see paper shoved into your shoes anymore. The boxes that shoes are packaged in are lighter. And when you add those things up across millions and millions of shoes, that makes a big difference. I think Nike has been losing market share, which is tough, making a commitment to cut costs and lay people off while at the same time keeping your sustainability efforts. I think that's very challenging. So I applaud them for what they've done. I think this is a bad signal from a communications point of view. They should have really doubled down and saying, look, we have gotten rid of people, but let us demonstrate what we're doing on the sustainability side. It's very expensive, but people are interested in doing the right thing, and consumers are actually pushing this. We talk a lot about startups on this podcast, and we are seeing that startups are able to scale, and we need more examples of that. But bureaucracies tend to move slowly. So that's also a part of the issue. And then at the end of it, goals that companies set are not laws. So it's unfortunate that these companies set these huge goals, but there's not any legal recourse for doing this or not. Mm-hmm. And I think in many cases, it's up to us, the consumer, to either let the companies know, hey, I'm not going to buy these sneakers because they're not sustainable or not recyclable or whatever. But I think that it's something for us to watch, and it's something for people in our audience to think about. And I'd love to hear what people think about this idea, or what we can do to push companies like Nike to be even more sustainable.
Well, we are going to have an opportunity to talk to a lot more consumer brands. You have been asked to lead the consumer track at SynBioBeta. Can you give us a little bit of a tease? I know we're going to talk about it. SynBioBeta is next year. We're going to probably bring people on the pod to talk more about it. But can you share what your thoughts are being the lead of the consumer track?
Yeah, so I want to just say thanks to the SynBioBeta team for having faith in me to be able to pull this off. And Erum, thank you for your help on this. I think that because of what we do on this podcast, and we do talk to a lot of companies, and our involvement with Biofabricate, our work with K18, and our interest in the impact that consumer product good companies, CPG companies have on the planet, I think all of those things kind of came together. So for us, I really want us to get in front of more of the big CPG companies so that we can let them know about the great things that are happening in the biotech industry. And I mean, that is the whole point of the Grow Everything podcast. We want to expand the audience. We want to demystify what's happening with biotechnology and how it already touches your life every day, but what the potential of it is for the future. Over the last couple of days, I've been obsessing about palm oil. I know we had Shara Tiku of C16 on the podcast, and palm oil is in 50% of all consumer products. It primarily comes from Indonesia and Malaysia. There was a supply chain shock during the pandemic. Indonesia decided to stop exporting it because they needed it for their domestic market. That sent the price through the roof. And that's an example of the impact that a product that is being produced in an unsustainable way can have on a global market. So I really want to talk to other people on the ingredient side and also the innovators at brands that we can bring into the podcast and also invite to the conference to be on panels and just educate the community in terms of what people are doing and the impact that it can have now and in the future. So I'm super excited about it. So thanks for bringing it up, Erum.
Yeah, I mean, it's the biggest thing that we need to reconcile when it comes to the bioeconomy. They're saying these big brands are making billions and billions of products. They're using petrochemicals. They're using animals at large scales. And how do we help them transition? And you mentioned getting consumer sentiment there so that the brands can say, hey, look, we need to transition now because the consumers are asking for it. Rather, so some deals are like, okay, let's just try it. The startup partners with, let's say, a Unilever. I think Perfect Day, for example, partnered with Unilever to make an ice cream. And unfortunately, what they branded the ice cream as is a lactose-free ice cream made by Perfect Day. Apparently it did okay, but then they shut it down. They're not really producing it at scale. Now, why that's happening, we need to investigate. Is it because they don't feel like they have the fermentation capacity? Are they still like trying to understand what the consumer demand is? And I think a big part of it, which is where we support a lot of companies, is getting that story out and getting that story straight. I think anytime you label a product lactose-free or dairy-free, it immediately prevents people that do like dairy and lactose from even trying it, because they're like, I can eat lactose, so I'm not even going to try that. So that message on marketing needs to be redone. You can't say dairy-free, lactose-free, because then that just eliminates people that do like dairy and lactose. And that's a huge number of people. Anyway, this is what we talk about, is how do you get the consumer excited about biology, excited about new products without, you don't have to fire hose them with biology messaging, but hint towards it. What Edward Shenderovich said on our podcast is that over 60% of consumers want bio-based products, but only 3% are actually purchasing it, because it all comes down to cost. And that cost, getting that down, really happens when it comes to the scale of making products, which these big corporations are doing. I'm just excited that we have this opportunity to talk to these big companies, talk to startups, and talk more to the consumer. Our audience, we're not just talking to one industry, we're talking to people that are consumers. What do they think about these products? And also just looking at what products are being purchased that are bio-based.
I would like to look into that story, because my feeling on all these things is P&G is like a formidable competitor. They don't do anything without a lot of research. So I want to know why. I mean, maybe this perfect day thing was considered to be a research project. So let's see how much we can sell, what kind of reaction we get from the marketplace. Let's look into it some more. But I think this is a good segue into our conversation, because we are talking about consumer sentiment, but an important part of consumer sentiment is workforce development. And you need a workforce to build the bioeconomy. And today on the podcast, we'll be talking to Kylie Porter. She's our second Australian on the podcast. She's from Queensland. So Queensland is the northeastern state of Australia. It's this huge state. And we met Kylie at SynBioBeta and got very interested in having her on the podcast, because Queensland is this very traditional economy that has a lot of coal mining, and they're transitioning from a coal-based economy to an economy that is focusing on biosolutions. So that's what Kylie's doing.
Awesome. And I'm excited for this interview because it also relates to our conversation with Natalie Kudal of BioBuilder, Linnea Fletcher of Innovate Bio, how they're looking to transition and introduce more people to biology, how to educate more people on what opportunities exist in biology. And this is just another way of really focusing our efforts in helping people build a bioeconomy. So let's let our conversation with Kylie Porter take it away.
Kylie Porter, it is early morning where you're located in Mackay, Australia. And we are so thrilled to have you on the Grow Everything podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, let's kick it off, and I'm going to make a statement. You could tell me how wrong I am. So you're in Northern Australia, in Queensland, and you're in what's called the Greater Whitsunday region, which is one of the world's most diverse economic regions, which I would have never known that. Can you give our listeners an introduction to the region, highlight what the most significant sectors are driving that economy? And then, of course, is there any biotech involved in that economy?
Absolutely. So when you think about the map of Australia, I want your viewers or your listeners to think about the triangular pointy bit of Australia. And so if you head about 3/4 of the way up that triangular pointy bit, you'll come to our region. We call it the Greater Whitsundays because we're an area of around 90,000 square kilometres. But we cover a very big area and cover a part of the coastline which sits alongside the Great Barrier Reef. So I think everybody can think about that. Beautiful corals, sandy beaches, tropical islands. So that's the coastline that our region travels alongside of. Our economy is exceptionally diverse. So our history is long in agriculture. So a very big sugarcane growing region, as well as lots of cattle. So very, very big cattle country here. And we produce about 8% of Australia's cattle production. So really significant numbers as well, plus a whole lot of, grains, oil seeds as well. But probably our most dominant sector And this is our most dominant sector by far, is coal mining. So we have probably what's regarded as the world's best quality metallurgical coal mining assets in this region. So it comes from a place right in the heart of our region called the Bowen Basin. And that basin has really high quality metallurgical or steel making coal assets. So that's what our economy is really driven and influenced by. And as we know, our world is changing, and our world is changing very fast. And we have an imperative to start de-risking our economy and start looking at where we can diversify to and towards. So we've done a lot of work as a region over the last couple of years, probably 6 or 7 years, about where are our strengths and what can we leverage to turn our economy slightly away from mining, because we know we'll still be mining for some time to come. But how can we use this time to go and chase other new and emerging sectors? And that's where the bioeconomy has come firmly into play for us. So we have, as I said, really big sugarcane producer in this region. A third of Australia's sugar comes out of this region here. And we've just started to introduce the concept of the bioeconomy into adding value to that sugar industry.
That's incredible. Yeah, I've learned a bit about Australia's mining capabilities. I have a friend that works at Rio Tinto, and he was telling me about, I think that the largest fleet they have goes from Australia to China in terms of the materials that are mined from Australia. Is that right?
Yeah, well, if your friend's working for Rio, they're probably working in iron ore or some of the other metals. So perhaps they're working in copper or something like that. But absolutely, we have on one side of the country in Western Australia, huge iron ore assets, which obviously is what goes into making steel. On the other side of the country, Australia's coal assets, where we have to use that coal to turn that iron ore into steel. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. But admire the transition. We all need to make that transition. You guys have identified that biology is a key driver for the economy. You're talking about sugarcane. Sounds like that would be an amazing feedstock for fermentation capability. I also understand that you were at SynBioBeta this year.
That's right.
Why did you go there? What was the purpose? I'm really interested to see what brought you to our part of the world.
I can't keep preaching to the converted in my local community. I have to take this story about what the scale of the opportunity is in Mackay, but also Queensland, to a broader audience. And SynBioBeta is the perfect place to do it. I was there with a cohort of other Aussies, and we were there to talk to anyone who would listen about how you build your biofuture here in Queensland. We had the CSIRO, which is Australia's National Science Agency. We had researchers, we had commercial proponents, we had venture capital, we had community. We were there to talk about why this location is the best, your SynBio expansion moving forward.
And what's the current role for biotech in the greater Whitsunday region?
It's absolutely in its infancy, Karl. We are not shy about talking about that's the reality, that this is going to be a new and emerging sector for us. However, we have a long history in the research component of that. QUT has had a biocommodity research facility located in Mackay for over a decade. That facility is currently undergoing a $16 million expansion as we speak. They'll be finished in the coming weeks. We have a number of proponents who are interested in co-locating their synthetic biology operations, precision fermentation operations, alongside with our sugar mills in region. So we're lucky enough to have 5 operational sugar mills in our footprint, which means that there are significant supply opportunities to be co-located with those mills in terms of feedstock.
Wow. Yeah, I really want to get into that. But first, I do want to know a little bit more about you, Kylie. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about your career? Like, how did you arrive at this Greater Whitsunday Alliance?
So first of all, it's probably useful to give some context about what is Greater Whitsunday Alliance. In Australia, no one ever calls you by your full name. Everybody has a nickname or a shortened version of your real name. So for Greater Whitsunday Alliance, our nickname is GW3. So everybody refers to us as GW3. So that's how I'll talk about us as an organisation. So GW3 is an economic development organisation for Mackay, Isaac and Whitsunday. They're the three sort of local government areas which makes up our broader region. And my job as CEO is to lead the organisation, think about what our economy needs to be in the future to make sure that we remain sustainable and prosperous for decades and generations to come. What do we need to be in the future, and what do we need to do today to set ourselves up for that future? What are the foundations we need to lay? So that's things like, how do you attract investment? How do we build really good digital infrastructure to support the industries that we're attracting to this region? That's the type of work that we do. I don't know really what the qualifications are that make you the perfect person to be a CEO of that type of organisation. My background is actually in marketing and communications. I think that what that means is that the skills that I have at translating difficult, hard concepts into a way that's digestible and can be understood by the average person is what's actually key about my skill set. I'm also a person who's from the regions. My family background is in this region. I love it. I think that regional Australia and broadly regions in any country across the globe have so much to offer, but are often pretty well overlooked for their big city counterpart. But the reality is that most of the wealth is driven out of regional parts of countries, yet we tend to overlook them, not necessarily engage with regions closely. They're not involved in decision making. They don't have seats at the table. I bring that passion for really trying to wedge the role of regions and communities into strategic conversations, but at the same time, I'm a bit of a talker, so I've been able to bridge the gap between some hard concepts and cutting through.
And is there rivalries between Queensland and New South Wales and Western Australia, for example? What's the beef between regions?
I wouldn't necessarily say that there's beef between states. It is always in a sporting context. So Australia has a couple of really unique football codes that don't exist anywhere else really at scale across the world. And one of them is the football code called National Rugby League. So if you ever Google it and go and check out a game, it's pretty mind-blowing how full on it is. But there is a very big interstate competition called the State of Origin between Queensland and New South Wales. So that is highly competitive and it happens during winter. So we're in peak State of Origin period at the moment, and Queensland's won one game and New South Wales has won one game and there's only one left to play. So we tend to get really patriotic about your state during State of Origin, but broadly I think Australians are actually very, very supportive, very community led and very community focused as a country. So we tend to actually have a lot of pride for every state. That competitive thing is not really so strong. However, if I have a proponent, if I have someone who's looking to invest here and they're thinking perhaps about Victoria, I'm absolutely going to go hard and sell them Queensland every day.
Hi, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Messaging Lab, the force multiplier for biotech. Your biotech company is making the world a better place. You know that, we know that. But does the world? There's a big reason why some biotech companies attract investors, sign up customers, and get attention. That reason is strategic communications. At Messaging Lab, we translate complex science and economics into compelling narratives. And we have done that for the most successful biotech companies across healthcare, agriculture, personal care and beauty, materials, and the list goes on. We're here to make sure your ideas not only get heard, but resonate with your audience. So if it's time to amplify your company's voice, visit messaginglab.com to explore how we can elevate your story and grow your business.
Yeah, who wants to be associated with that Victoria anyway? It's just too far from anything. Melbourne.
Exactly. Too cold as well, you know?
Yeah, and it's cold down there.
Yeah, exactly right.
I love the fact that you have a lot of allegiance and pride in the region. And I mean, I'm really curious, since you are the CEO of this alliance, how do you promote this economic development? Do you do marketing? That's your background. How do you rally the troops?
Well, I think that the biggest challenge that we have is that you've got to believe in it yourself. So I've got to create, and this is what I talk about, is a coalition of the willing. So our focus has been around creating champions or advocates who can also help us tell and sell our story. We've really worked hard on creating and curating relationships with key people who can strongly advocate for the opportunities in this region. And that might be obviously locals. I talk to business leaders, industry leaders who are regionally based, and make sure that they very clearly understand a simple narrative that they can repeat. That's important. But then we also highlight and then target people that we feel are influential outside of our region who can add value to our storytelling. And we spend a lot of time on grooming them to be great advocates for our region, because the reality is that I need to have many millions of micro conversations around the opportunities, but also the challenges that face us before I'm absolutely going to see any movement in economic shifts that we need to achieve. We're very pragmatic and very practical about the scale of the task ahead of us. We have an economy which broadly around 60% reliant on the coal industry. So we absolutely understand that the scale of the challenge is big. But if we don't start today, it'll be a whole lot harder when that time comes where we must transition.
And when you go out and you talk to people about biotechnology as being one of the potential key drivers for the economy in the region, what kind of reaction do you get from people, given that it's so nascent, especially?
Well, I would say that when we first started this conversation, and our region identified that there was good alignment between our industry, feedstock, but also our regional skill set. So the skills and expertise that we have in region through our workforce. We did that analysis back in about 2018, 2019, that there was great alignment. I've been telling this story now for 6 years. When I first started talking to people about it, everyone was a bit, So you're going to do what from sugar? The mind-blowingness of particularly precision fermentation and synthetic biology is really at heart, at the start, a very hard concept to wrap your head around, especially when you're used to, well, this is why we grow sugarcane, because the end product is sugar to go in your tea and your coffee. At the start, it was really mind-blowing. I think that over the past 3 years, probably even more so and closer to the last 18 months, the awareness around the power of tech and the power of science has really amplified globally. And where people were a little bit previously a bit skeptical about what could be done are now going, you know what, this is actually real. And this is what's ahead of us as a region. And it's starting to make people feel a little bit excited about the opportunity that this little region, which has always produced sugar since its inception, is actually going to have a play in a really high-tech, high-science, high-value sector in the near future.
And can you tell us a little bit about how sugarcane is being used in a biotechnology context? It's early. Are companies starting to use it? And can you talk a little bit about the fledgling or the emergence of this biotech economy in your region?
I have to be really clear is that at scale, we're not there. So we have a research facility which has some fermentation capability, which they're expanding at the moment. But what we are working with is some large-scale proponents who are working particularly very closely with the Queensland Government about building facility number 1 in this region. And they will be large-scale synthetic precision fermentation, so it'll be contract manufacturing facility looking to produce a range of product from sugar as the feedstock. So they'll be co-located with one of our main sugar mills in this region, literally on the site. They'll be powered by the green energy that the sugar mill produces, and that will really be our first real economic and commercial test around the future of this biotechnology sector in our region.
One of the reasons why I wanted to have you on was we've been fascinated by this idea of biotech is this global industry, and every place that embraces it is going to have a different approach or different way of using it. You're talking about sugarcane as being one of the feedstocks. We have sugarcane here. I don't hear so many of the SynBio companies talking about using sugar as a feedstock. They always talk about corn. But the other thing is Australia is such a unique ecosystem. There's got to be some fascinating microbes that have the potential to do a lot of things beyond what you guys are talking about doing on the fermentation side.
Absolutely. I think we're a country that has a long history on having fantastic natural resources, and that's been our claim to fame. So we have really huge assets and deposits of coal and iron ore and copper and all of these great things, as well as we have lots and lots of land, big country, low population. All of those sort of things that have played into a story that Australia is a very export dominant country, but our exports are really in its raw form. We're sending coal and iron ore offshore and then onshoring the end product of steel. There is a really very strong focus about how do we take the smarts that we're actually developing here. And you're exactly right. The work that's being done, playing around with some of these microbes that have the potential to really change industrial landscapes, how we've approached industrial production in the past, taking the smarts that are developed and often designed and cracked here from a science perspective, but rather than just immediately taking it offshore, how can we actually grow that sector and grow those industries and grow that production at commercial scale here in the country? And that big push is absolutely super ambitious. But I think that it's possible. And we have a very unique location in Australia. So we're very Western economic principles. However, our location is in the Southern Hemisphere, far closer and connected to the emerging Asian markets. So really unique location globally to be able to provide that bridge between the Northern and Southern Hemispheres.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always fascinated about Australia and its position in the world and how it relates to Asia. I myself lived in Malaysia for some time. I've been to New Zealand, haven't been to Australia. Sorry.
That's all right.
Please forgive me.
That's okay.
But I appreciate the thinking behind growing this new economy. Karl and I, we love talking to a lot of the biotech startups, and we participate in a lot of biotech ecosystems here in the United States. So I'm interested to learn more about how GW3 is establishing ecosystems and supporting emerging startups. Are there biotech startups in your region? And I'd love to learn a little bit more about them. Is there something in the works? Is there a program in the works? Just anything along those lines?
Yeah, you actually asked a really good question about ecosystem. And I've had this conversation with many people, particularly over the last 12 months, about the work that we're doing and the surprise to me that this is so innovative globally, that this work that we do is like no one else is doing it. And I keep going, what do you mean? Because to me, it's quite obvious what we need to do. So when we talk about ecosystems, and there is the beautiful ecosystem diagram which calls out all the actors or the agents who are involved in an ecosystem, particularly for startups. So there will be venture or capital, there will be government, there will be corporate, there will be startups, whatever. So there's that little diagram. And then community is always there. And community is always a part of that diagram. But the thing is that we've labelled it community. But the reality is that community isn't a concept and it's not one thing. It's not one person. Community is many stakeholders who actually just happen to live in a place. What we're actually doing is underplaying the importance of community by giving it one label and making people think that it's only one box that they've got to tick. So if they connect or engage with an organisation like me, that they have done community. Well, we've got community all taken care of. Whereas the reality is that community is really mixed and really diverse and actually requires a whole lot of work to be able to really embed your idea, your concept, your business, your opportunity deeply. And I think we've forgotten about that step. The era that we're in of this rapid rollout of new tech or this rapid rollout of something new We're just glossing over the community part, and then we get really surprised about take up is slow, or understanding has been slow, or people aren't getting it as quickly as I thought. Why isn't everybody on the scope?
They're resistant.
Yeah, they're resistant because we've spoken to one person, therefore we can tick that community box and it's done. And it's not done because community isn't one person, one thing. Community is really a long, deep list. So what GW3 does, the best way to describe our role is that we're super connectors. Our job is to connect as many people with a concept or as many concepts to the people. We come at it from two different ways. So particularly if we're to talk about the bioeconomy space, how we've done that is very deliberately by assembling what I call a leaders group. So we have a regionally based leaders group, and this is my coalition of the willing in a local context. So they are all of my key industry, business, community leaders come together, and we have really worked hard to educate, share information around the next steps for establishing this as a new and emerging sector in our region. They obviously then take that information and knowledge and they go away and they start influencing their networks. So we use that as our coalition of the willing to start telling this story. And from there, we then take that story and we build it into our workforce development pieces and work that we do. So we take that story into schools. So when we are delivering a program into school about what jobs at this region may look like in the next 10 years, we ensure that we have built those biotechnology opportunities which will exist here in 10 years' time. We make sure that when we're dealing with telcos or telecommunication ministers, in Canberra around how they fund technology projects or digital projects in our region, we make sure that we talk about the high-tech requirements of this sector to ensure that we have investment coming into infrastructure. We've really layered lots of responses and initiatives and activities to make sure that we are building out the community ecosystem. And I think that if more people paid the same amount of attention to the many, many, many stakeholders that were involved in community, that perhaps the pathway could be a whole lot smoother.
I'm curious, we've talked about regional and we've talked about your region specifically, but what about from a national initiative? What's the Australian blueprint for biotech look like for growing the bioeconomy?
I would have to say that there is certainly really strong appetite. In an ideal world, I'd love there to be a biotech minister and ministry. That would be great because I think it would absolutely have some clearer pathways. But there is a role for biotechnology. One of the interesting things is it's a bit of a grey space because the genesis of the sector is in ag. So we need this feedstock. It's this sort of shared, at the moment, this shared opportunity between agriculture and science and technology. And that makes it a little less clear. It's not as clear as some of those other new emerging sectors are, which might be critical minerals, for example, or hydrogen or whatever it is. That's very easy to put in a box. Biotech, not so easy, but there is strong leadership coming out of Canberra, our capital, where the federal government is held. There is definitely strong leadership coming that way. But from a Queensland perspective, so from a state perspective, Queensland probably has the most mature thinking of a state around the biotechnology sector across Australia. So very clear thinking and very clear aspirations about what the state wants to be in this space.
Yeah, I'm so interested to learn what the political environment is in Australia. Is it just everyone's just chilling, having a beer, watching rugby, or are they as divisive and sorry, I know, don't call HR.
Australian politics is as volatile as anywhere else in the world.
Oh, okay.
Am I right, Kylie?
Look, I'd actually say that it's not as personal in Australia as it is particularly in your part of the world. Obviously, it always shocks people when we talk about voting in Australia is compulsory. So we tend to look at it as being a responsibility as opposed to some deeply held emotional philosophy. And I think that's the big difference, that we just get on with it. It's our obligation and our responsibility to vote because you get fined if you don't. So we tend to just approach it with that way. There is less emotion about our politics. It doesn't mean that it's less volatile. There is still yelling and screaming and bad behaviour from politicians, but there is less emotion probably coming from the voter base.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely a lot of motion. And one of the things coming into this interview, and Karl and I were talking about the fact that there's a coal mining industry, and obviously one here in the United States, and that's always a point of political discussion. It's like a lever saying, okay, well, the coal workers are being affected. All their jobs are getting taken away. Is that politically motivated in Australia? So coal workers, are they upset about new technology? Do they want to keep their jobs? Or are they open to saying, oh, okay, yeah, biotechnology? I know that at first they're like, what? Synthetic biology? What are you guys doing? But are they now becoming more receptive? And how are you helping with that?
Like I said earlier, the coal sector is a hugely dominant part of our economy regionally. So absolutely, there is going to be a significant change over the coming decades, because this is not a next year, 2 years' time, we're looking to transition away from coal. We've got decades of planning ahead of us to be able to achieve that. I think what surprises people about the Australian coal industry is that it's actually really high-tech, high automation. It is an industry, particularly in Australia, that is safety-led. So safety is the number one core guiding principle of operations of coal mines in Australia. There's been a lot of investment around technology to be able to do that extraction and processing in the safest possible way. So we're a region, and it's an industry that's actually really quite comfortable with the idea of embracing tech to improve efficiencies. What we've actually found, particularly doing our research about what are our new industries that are ahead of us, that are aligned with our skills and expertise in this region, is that, believe it or not, coal mining and the skills that we've been able to develop through coal mining are actually really aligned to the biotechnology sector. We know that, yes, you need scientists and chemists and those science-focused workers, but for every single one of those, we need a whole lot of trade workers. And that's what this region has developed a lot of over a long period of time because of the coal mining industry. So we see really strong synergies between this experience and expertise that we've developed in coal mining to driving a whole range of new industries in our region. I think it's this beautiful, almost full circle moment that history started in agriculture because of the nature of sugar milling, and our region became a very big service centre for the location of the coal mines because, as I said at the start, our region is very big. It's 90,000 square kilometres. The closest coal mine to where I'm standing today is 200 kilometres west. So a long way inland, but all of the service, maintenance, all of that comes from this region, because this is where the population base is. As we start to evolve our economy, we're going to see the rise of that sugar piece, which was the genesis of our community, really come back into strong play again. We wouldn't be where we are. We would not be talking about the opportunities that are ahead of us in the biotechnology sector if it wasn't for coal mining. We would not have those really deep set of expertise and skills broadly across this region that would help us transition into that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, so this is part of that 2019 report or the study that your region did about the population skills.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more specifically, what are the skills that the coal miners in your region have that do translate into biotechnology industry?
The vast majority of our region's coal mining, they may not actually be at the coalface. They're not actually digging the mine, even though there are certainly many operators that are involved in that. But it's the supporting supply chain that sits around coal mining. That's where we have that real alignment. It's the trades, it's the technicians, it's their high-value electrical workers. You've got to remember that these mine site operations are incredibly sophisticated, very advanced. They're using a lot of automated technology. A lot of those sites are running fully autonomous vehicles across the sites. It's all of that supply chain that services and supports that equipment that is transferable into the biotechnology. Operating precision fermentation plants, there are actually a whole lot of similarities around the skill sets that are required. So we've done that analysis over a long period of time, and we're actually just about to release another report in the coming weeks, which does some further deep diving into the skills and expertise of our region and linking them to 7 key and emerging industries that are ahead of us. And absolutely, I can say with absolute confidence that whilst there seems a really big disconnect from coal mining and the biotechnology sector, they're actually beautifully aligned, and for us will go hand in hand.
Amazing. I'm curious, Kylie, as you look at the rest of the world, are there any regions or countries that you guys have looked to and said, we like the way they're evolving their bioeconomy, or there's lessons we've learned from these guys that we can translate here at home?
Absolutely. And I think that Californians, you guys are doing it really well in terms of your integration around your community college programs. That's different to Australia. Australia has something which we call TAFEs, which are technical colleges. They're our version of your community colleges to a certain degree. It's where you go to get your trade style qualification. I think that your community college networks, particularly in locations where the biotechnology sector is starting to establish itself, has been way more nimble than our system is to be able to produce qualifications and education and training in those regions. We have a really ridiculously long lead time sometimes into creating industry-specific curriculum and content. And I think there's a huge lesson that we can take from the community college program and embed that more successfully here, particularly around these new and emerging industries. As you rightly said, Karl, this is pretty nascent as a sector globally. We're in its infancy. There's not a lot of really best case examples yet of anyone doing it perfectly well. I think there's some really good thinking coming out of Germany and some of the regions in Germany, but I think it's going to be a bit of a case of we're going to have to feel it, hopefully feel as we go.
Yeah, we have someone for you if you're looking for someone who has been working with community colleges and helping upskill or reskill students into the biotechnology space. And that organization is called Innovate Bio, Linnea Fletcher. So we'll make the introduction.
And we do see the same thing here in New York City, where Erum and I talk a lot about meeting at a community biolab called GenSpace. But GenSpace has a grant from the city of New York for a program called Break into Biotech, which is a workforce development program specifically to get more people into the biotech industry. And I think that there's probably programs like that in our big biotech economic centers. So I would say Boston, San Francisco, San Diego probably have the same kinds of things. But I think Linnea would be a great person for you to speak with. I'm also curious. I think that the perception is probably coal is not like a super sustainable. I don't like to beat up on any industry too much, but how does GW3 address the need for sustainable development, and how does biotech fit into that?
Absolutely. So biotech absolutely fits into our ambitions for a decarbonised economy. So we're like every other region in every country on the planet at the moment, trying to work out how do you quickly and efficiently reduce emissions without completely breaking your economy at the same time. We have to find that balance. The reality is that livelihoods, standards of living, social and community infrastructure, and society at large relies on the economic realities that big industry deliver. Biotechnology, from our perspective, is one of those new and emerging sectors that we're chasing because of its lower carbon potential. So there's still big energy users. However, the bigger picture of carbon emissions is certainly more attractive. We're working really hard to find that balance. So yes, we're looking for those new lower emission industries that we can attract and embed here in region, but at the same time, acknowledging that our legacy sectors are going to be around for a very long time. What can we do now to be on a pathway of actively reducing emissions? GW3 runs a program which is called Decarbonization Accelerated. That's predominantly aimed at the supply chains that sit around mining. The big miners in Australia, probably not dissimilar to what's happening in the US, have their own really aggressive and ambitious carbon reduction targets. At a company level, they're working really hard to those carbon targets. We obviously have government frameworks that sit above that. Again, this is this missing piece. We talk about community. A community knows that they have to decarbonise. Do they? Does community know that they have to decarbonise? There's a lot of small, medium enterprises or businesses out there that would have no idea what their obligations are within Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3. Yet we throw these terms around all the time like they are just bread and butter, like everyone understands what that means. We've forgotten to take them on a journey. So we have this Decarbonisation Accelerator program, which is specifically designed to, at a very grassroots entry level, to talk to that supply chain that sits around the mining sector, because we know that even though this sector will be around for a long time to come, it needs to be actively working to reduce its emissions footprint. We're trying to find that balance at the moment, working hard in attracting new low emissions industry to region, but also working with existing legacy sectors to get their emissions down as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Geez, it's a hard balancing act at the moment. There is a lot coming at regions like ours, and making sure that we protect our economy, maintain our reputation and credibility, because we need to do that whilst we're trying to woo and sweeten up some new and emerging industries, which might be a bit put off by our coal mining credentials. We've got to be able to demonstrate that we're on a decarbonising path at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, do you get partnerships with other organizations from other countries? Is there activity? Earlier you mentioned that you went to SynBioBeta to drum up interest to come into the region, so bring some US interest into the GW3 area, but other countries that you're partnering with?
Singapore, particularly, mainly because that's a really strong epicenter in Asia, particularly around biotechnology. The interesting thing about Singapore, there's a huge amount of investment in this space, but there's no feedstock and there's no growth, no room for expansion. They're just there. From a locality perspective, our temperatures, our climate is very similar. That means that the microbes that are being developed in Singapore would have similar conditions here in North Queensland. So absolutely, we're looking very much into Singapore. I think our challenge is establishing our first contract manufacturing facility and working really closely as Karl with the people from the Cauldron folk and Main Sequence to get their first facility established here. And then I think we've got that proof demonstration point. And I think that that will be the tipping point for what this region can be in biotechnology.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, and just to remind our listeners, Cauldron is the precision fermentation company that does continuous precision fermentation and based in New South Wales. As we close out this interview, Kylie, you're leading a great effort. We're super interested in how this progresses. Is there any key strategies that you want to share that you've used to evangelize for biotech in your region and abroad? What have you done strategically to help people get it? And what gets the people around you excited about what you're doing?
I'd probably say I've got 3 simple ingredients in the secret sauce. And to be really clear, we're not done yet. My secret sauce is obviously a long, low temperature, boil, simmer away secret sauce style recipe. This is not a hard, fast cook. Number 1 is you've got to invest in the research and the evidence. I think that we would be having these conversations today and be at this point if we didn't understand our region's natural comparative and competitive advantages. And not just stuff that we think we know, we've actually gone and invested in the research. So we understand that we have great people, skills, strengths, all of those types of things. We had the feedstock, all of that. We invested in that research. Number 2 is around creating that coalition of the willing. That is really important. You need a network of champions and advocates to be able to assemble with you and stand shoulder to shoulder in telling this story. And I need them to go out and influence their own network. So that second one was really important. And then the last one is perseverance. It took us 50 years to have an economy that's 60% reliant on one sector. It will take at least the next 50 years to unpick that and replace that with multiple other new and emerging sectors. So I think that we've got to lose this mindset that this stuff happens fast, because it doesn't. It will take time, and you've got to be prepared to buckle in and persevere and be in it for the long haul. And they're my three things that I can only recommend that everyone else gives a go.
Excellent. Was there anything, Kylie, that we didn't cover that you think we should have covered?
It was a pretty rollicking conversation,
Right.
so I think that we covered it all.
Well, thank you so much for taking time to speak with us. We just wish you the best of luck. We're so excited to have had this conversation.
Thank you so much. It was a really great chance encounter at SynBioBeta, and thank you so much for having me on.
Our pleasure.
Thank you so much, Kylie. This is awesome.
Erum, what did you think of this interview with Kylie Porter?
I loved it. I think it's so great to hear about growing the bioeconomy from people that live in different parts of the world, because you learn so much. We have a risk of being in an echo chamber when we're just talking to people in the United States. But when we break out and talk to people in different parts of the world, we start seeing their approach. One of the big things that I really took away from this is how Kylie positioned the coal industry as a tech industry, because a lot of the discussion of coal miners in the United States are, hey, look, these are people that are picking themselves from their bootstraps. They're going into the coal mines. It's like, look, these people have a job and they're just used to it. You can't bring technology into it. But in fact, a lot of people that work in the coal industry do need to leverage technology, and they are. Then she said that a lot of the skills from the people that work in the coal industry in her region can be transferred into biotech. And I loved that point that she made. It's not that they have to be so upskilled that they need loads of education to go into the biotech industry or transition to biotech. They can be really easily transitioned.
This idea of this collaboration between the industry, between the Australian science initiatives, between founders, venture capitalists, and local agencies is super important. And I think we're going to see more of that.
Yeah. And they showed their unity, right? That cross-sector collaboration was seen full force at SynBioBeta, because their National Science Institute, it was Kylie, it was Michelle Stansfield of Cauldron, other founders, other investors, Main Sequence, they all rolled up together. They had a shared booth at SynBioBeta, and they had a panel discussion together, at least Michelle Stansfield and a gentleman from CISRA, which is their national science organization. And they talked about their country in unison. It wasn't just like, I'm doing this in a silo. They say we're working together and they're taking steps. One of the things that they're doing in Australia, which I heard it's in BioBeta and Kylie mentioned a little bit, is that designating some of their sugar fields for SynBio use only. So they're saying this is what we're growing here is for SynBio. You cannot use it for consumer products. You can't use it. Maybe if someone comes along and is like, yeah, I'll pay you 10x for that. I don't know if they would waiver, but I like the fact that they had said that. And I was like, okay, they're doing it. They're doing it in such a beautiful way. And I hope more people hear this and start thinking of cross-sector collaboration and doing projects together and making that the story, that it's not just hidden like, oh yeah, we're doing all this amazing work and no one's hearing about it. No. So we can just start copying and pasting this model of cross-sector collaboration and saying like, this is the only way that we can win. And it's not just one startup that's going to come and solve all the problems. Clearly, Amazon, not the FARS, but Amazon, the company, they created a great solution. They made buying things more convenient. At what cost? There's like other things going on, but how much cross-sector collaboration is going on? Another big takeaway from this episode is that we need to go to Australia.
Yeah, I mean, Australia basically made it seem like the door is open for biotech, synthetic biology. They're really going all in on it. And I think we should try to get Phil or someone from Main Sequence Ventures on to talk about it and maybe to contrast it with some of the efforts that are going on. But I totally agree with you. You need to have this matrix collaboration when you're trying to make a change. Earlier, we were talking about big companies. Many big companies use the same kind of ingredients, the same kind of materials. How do they collaborate with each other to make sure that the supply chain of those ingredients are sustainable and maybe bio-based? I think that kind of thing is something that we're super interested in and we want to see more of. So if someone in the audience, you can give us some insight on that, we'd love to have you on the podcast. I think it's a fascinating thing to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Also, I feel like this episode was almost an ad for biotech founders and biotech companies to go to Australia. I mean, Kylie was just like, please come here, because that is what she's trying to do, is build the bioeconomy. And wow, I would love to go there. I had this question in my mind the other day. What's the oldest continuous living forest in the world? And I asked all of the AIs, they all said Daintree rainforest in Queensland, which is 180 million years old. So that's older than the Amazon rainforest. And I looked up pictures of it and wow, like the creatures that are there, I swear they have like dinosaurs there. I mean, birds are dinosaurs, but they have these emu-like birds that look like dinosaurs, because I don't know if you've ever seen those like renderings of what dinosaurs actually look like based on all the knowledge of looking at dinosaurs. And they're like, okay, we thought dinosaurs had scales and look like crocodiles, but they actually had feathers. And then they show like what that actually looks like. Well, there is a creature in the Daintree rainforest that looks just like those images. And I was like, oh my God.
That's amazing.
That is amazing. And I was like, the biology that's there. If you are a biotech founder and you love biology, which I'm sure you, listener, do because you're listening to this podcast, what an exciting trip that would be to go to the Daintree rainforest. And hey, you can set up shop and work from there. I mean, we'll connect you to Kylie. She'll set you up with all the resources you need. They seem like they're a buttoned up shop that they can help you with getting what you need to build your company there. But yeah, wow, I would really want to go.
We'll leave the details in the show notes. And I think that's the pod.
Yes, absolutely. I always have to say, if you have any other additional thoughts, any news tips or hot tips you want to share with us, please reach out to us. There's multiple ways you can find in the show notes. And we love, 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 love our Patreon. So if you're feeling friendly and generous, we would love to have you part of our Patreon community. The link is in the show notes. So thank you so much.
Thank you.